Welcome everyone to our Visualize and Realize webinar. So today's webinar is going to be a little bit different in the sense that we are going to look with vision as to what our end result of our images is supposed to be. My name is Nico. Next to me, I have Neil. Welcome again. We're very excited to host this one today. And let's have a look at what we're going to discuss. So we're going to look at the types of editing, predominantly what are you using your images for, editing software options, covering basic editing, colors, select adjustments. Then we're going to go over to introduction to workflow, and then we're going to look at the building blocks of all this and putting it together. Composition, design elements, visualizing the end result, denoise and sharpening, of course, we all know is a major part in today's editing, fixing mistakes. Then we're going to have a live demonstration right at the end, and after the live demonstration, we're going to have a bit of a Q&A session to answer any of the questions that you guys might have throughout this. So let's firstly look at the types of editing that we have. Predominantly, it's enhancing photos. Now, that refers to anything that you could have done in camera with editing settings, basic techniques, and then we're looking at basic stuff that you could have done in a darkroom, for instance. So it's brightness, contrast, saturation. We're looking at color changes, cropping, straightening of the horizons. And then all of this really comes down to the authenticity of the photo. It still needs to be true to the nature photograph that you're trying to portray. And then we're looking at upscaling as part of that now these days. Manipulation refers to anything that you alter the image by removing or adding it, or to achieve an artistic effect to get to your image. So let's look a bit quickly at your end result. I don't know if anyone remembers, we've referred to in a previous webinar that every single image that you produce has to be edited. The only ones that you don't edit, of course, is like if it's completely out of focus or it's completely black, let's say completely black, to the extent where you cannot salvage anything. Now, let's look at a few of the formats, and I'm not going to go too much in this, but you have your major social media ones, which is Instagram and Facebook. Facebook is the more forgiving in the sense that you can really post any image, no matter the crop that you have. Instagram has very specific crops, where it's a 5:4, which is a more of a medium format, and then there's a very interesting landscape crop. Now, that's not to say when you do your Instagram crop that you cannot post it to Facebook. So if you don't want to do too many various types of crops, you can use that as a starting point and then move that over onto the Facebook platform. Now, there's various other mediums that have come on the market. You have Threads, for instance. Some people start posting their images onto LinkedIn, etc., for instance, on their business profiles. But these are the two major ones. Now, again, the reason why we put this subject matter into the webinar is that guys edit so many photographs, but they never see the light of day. They stay on their computers or they stay in hard drives. What's the point? You need to share it. Just tell your amazing stories. And by doing this and visualizing, realizing the end result, you are going to achieve something that is definitely worth sharing. So the most popular editing software currently in the market is DxO PhotoLab 7 and then Lightroom. There are other options available that are growing, like Neil, what's Topaz one's called?
On one and AI, yeah.
Yeah, so on one AI, we have multiple AI editing features. Then you have upscaling as part of those software, but you can do dedicated upscaling software like On One Resize, Topaz Gigapixel. And then on the editing side, you can still look at Photoshop as a medium, but probably the most difficult and complicated, the rest with a much more difficult learning curve, but it's predominantly seen as a graphic editing tool, so more for manipulation. Let's quickly look at what we look at when we originally spoke to you about image correction and what that falls part of. So that is standard presets, which most software has currently set onto it. You can complicate it a little bit more and set up your own presets. Then, of course, now we run through the light panel, which is exposure compensation, getting the correct density throughout the photo. Protecting the highlights, number one. Again, if the highlights are blown, you cannot salvage it. Looking at shadows, bringing back the details in the darker areas, looking to get the blacks back to being black again and not gray. and in contrast to create depth in your image itself. Color adjustments, white balance, warmer, bluer tones, color profiles, which are set to various camera models. And then, of course, each of the software has its own standard profiles preset into it as well, which can be adjusted and fine-tuned. But that's getting a little bit more into the complicated side. Vibrancy, your color tones, how rich they are. Do you want them richer? Do you want them less saturated? And then certain software, and now Lightroom has actually introduced us into recent updates where you can do selective color channels, which DxO has been doing for quite a while now. And in color grading, color mixing, where you can do various kind of color shifts to get like a little bit more cinematic feel. But now you're starting to turn a little bit more eye feel to manipulation instead of staying true to the nature of the photo. Looking at then going more in depth are selected adjustments. Now, this is where you go and edit very specific points within the photograph to put emphasis into it. Now, when we refer to that, and we'll go delve a little bit deeper into examples that we have, but that's like, for instance, bringing out the bird's eye, taking specific ranges in the sky if you have blue tones or purple tones, putting a bit more emphasis onto that, and breaking down your background and foreground. Is there specific points in those regions that you need to make less distracting, or do you need to enhance them to bring out a better storytelling aspect within the overall image? So visually, it needs to be a lot more appealing to the end result. Now, here's where I'm going to hand over to Neil, because I think this is one of the biggest Achilles heels that most photographers have, is that they have a workflow, but it's not necessarily a very effective workflow. And this is where it becomes a little bit cumbersome for people. So Neil, I'm going to hand it over to you, because I think you personally have a little bit more of a structured approach compared to what most other guys have.
No, thank you, Nico. So just speaking from a Lightroom user perspective, that's where I do most of my editing in. And I would basically start by creating a folder for the trip that I'm on. And then from there, make sure that I download those images on a session by session basis, or maybe on a day-to-day basis if there aren't too many images coming. So create the folder first of all, and then I use Lightroom to import those images into that folder. If I want to rename any of those images specifically or put in a keyword, then I would do it within Lightroom. So once that's all in, I will then start running through the sequences, some of them now with the Sony's, the other cameras that shoot capture, you have large sequences. So you can run through the sequences very quickly, select one or two images that you deem worthy, mark it either by a color or a number, and the ones that you know you're going to use, just hit the X button on the keyboard for both DxO and for Lightroom, and keep on selecting those that you're going to delete later on. It's just part of the process that helps you not have to go back once you've finished selecting the images. Obviously, when you go through your images, you look for the ones that have impact. Is there any action, interaction, something that catches your eye immediately? Then once that's done, I would take those images, I would put them into my selected software, either DxO, drag it and drop into DxO, or I'll continue editing in Lightroom. First step is to take my presets, because both those programs allow you to create a preset up front, so which does most of the donkey work for you. So you've got a preset, you can select it, that applies to the images that you've selected, and that is step number one for me. If you do your noise reduction in Lightroom, that would actually be step number one. So Lightroom has a section under the detail where it allows you to do noise reduction. Do the noise reduction first, then if you do your preset after that, it would also work. Alternatively, on the DxO side, we'll cover that just now. The noise reduction and sharpening happens as part of the export process in the DxO suite. So once you've done that, I do my crop to remove clutter and to use any of the specific rules, like rule of thirds, rule of fifths, to get rid of most of the clutter and really focus where the action or the action point in your images. Then the other things that you can do is you apply your exposure, reduce highlights, and bring out the detail in the shadows. The software nowadays, incredible ability to reduce those. Make sure that you bring the blacks back, that you have the correct density in your image. Then if you're going to export after that, keep in mind what Nico's just gone through in terms of the social media. Are you doing it for email? So a small image. Are you doing it for Instagram, Lightroom? Then I go and save them in those specific folders. Then I know what I'm going to do with them. Key to composition. You guys read faster than I can speak. But first of all, if you're an artist, you've got a canvas, you paint, you put whatever elements in what works on that canvas. From a photographer's point of view, if you're shooting and it's really a full frame, then you're going to try and compose that image as best as possible when you press that shutter. Alternatively, this is where you start working when you are editing with the crop to get all these intersections and lines correct. So we're going to cover a few of them. So what's the purpose of composition, first of all? Well, first of all, for me, it's eliminate clutter to get the balance of your image right. You want to emphasize not only the image, but the area in that image where the action is actually taking place, and that you want to focus on, be it a bug or a foot or some flies on the head of a lion or whatever you think would be interesting. And then it's also to share the experience, because once you get into that level of detail, it opens up another world so people can have a look at it and really appreciate what you've done. So some of the building blocks that you see there on the right, I mean, the rules of thirds, fifths, triangles, diagonals, uneven numbers, scale, all the way down to breaking the rules. These have been around for a long, long time, and the artists use it very, very successfully as well. A few examples of composition, third lines. Have a look at where these intersections are. The giraffe there on the head, rule of fifths, create some scale to the image. On the left, some space. Diagonal lines, you've got primary and secondary lines. This one is a primary line going from bottom left. You see the bird is going to dive, and that draws your eye into that specific area. The elements of design, leading lines. Where are these lines leading your eyes? Are the diagonals or horizontal, vertical? And we'll see now examples of S lines. That's where your eye follows. That really makes it for a pleasing image. And it doesn't distract your eye that you're looking in one area and then in another. Example of some of these elements of triangles, and also the leading line going from left to right. You see these triangles, and it just makes for an appealing image. We move on to S lines. It follows the footsteps of that photographer all the way up the dune, and you can almost feel as if you're going with him. You've got the dark and the light parts of the image that also nicely dissects it.
Okay, guys, so here we're going to go now a little bit more, I think, into the fun part. As where the first parts were, again, a little bit more the technical side, getting now into the first steps of the core essence of the visualize side. So there are really multiple factors and layers within images that we need to consider. It's not just about what we see, but it's about what we are going to portray. So if you're looking into breaking into different sections, is we have on our focus point number one, what is our main subject matter, as Neil just mentioned previously, that we want to put emphasis on, or sometimes it could be multiple points of focus within a photograph. You have your foregrounds, you have your backgrounds that are equally just as important as your subject matter, your sky in landscape specifically, distracting objects, little branches, twigs, a stump. It could be something as simple as another bird that entered into the frame with wing that's slipping. So now let's look at breaking the image and dissecting it down. The little piece of grass on the right-hand side is not as distracting as what initially we thought in the image, because now we have two main points of focus really in the image that we have to look at. Number one, the sun has been placed on the 7th. The duck right at the bottom has been placed on the 7th. And then if you kind of look at it, where a leading line normally runs from a bottom diagonally to the other side, the sun's line or reflection in the water kind of gives me a leading line to a point of focus of the sun. And then editing in areas have been done to put emphasis on specific areas. In the sun, where we enhance the colors, but I also brought down the highlights to not overpower it. The same with the reflection in the water, brought down the highlights and put more emphasis on that golden red glow. And then just slightly did a little selective editing on the duck, sharpening a bit more, and then the splash in the water, which I think added to the drama to portray the story that he's in a hurry to get somewhere, to bring that water out a bit more, put a little bit more highlights in it, and then sharpen it a little bit more, again, to put the emphasis back into the photo.
And also, Nico, the grass on the right is now a destination where this duck is moving to.
Yeah, so it's reaching an end point. And then in background, the horizon, I felt that initially a little bit of the shadows were out. It was, you could see a bit more of the detail on the grass, etc. So I selectively went and darkened that to give it more of a silhouette effect, which I think now it's not as distracting as what it was initially, because my eye is actually now going to the point that I want people to have a look at. End result. So this is a very interesting photo in the sense that straight out of the camera, it's already appealing to the eye.
One of our clients.
One of our clients, Margie Hidden. I need to give credit to her with this. But I mean, technically, there's absolutely almost nothing wrong with this image. There's no blown highlights in this. You have the detail in the rocks. You have the detail in the mountain in the back, in the hole of the wall. And you have this beautiful sky and the colors within the clouds, which I think is really great. Now, again, this is something that I want to put emphasis on, is that every single photo, no matter how good it is, also needs further editing. Because you can make things a lot more dramatic and you can bring detail out a lot better, or you can put emphasis on detail. Elements, we have a rule of thirds, we have a rule of fifths, we have a central point right in the middle of the hole in the wall where our eyes are drawn to. We actually have the slowest shutter speed in the bottom right-hand corner in the water, which is also really nice to look at. We have the leading line from the bottom right, drawing us again to the hole in the wall. So I processed in the sense that I thought, like, immediately there's a lot more drama that I can add to the photo. So what I did was I darkened the highlights on the pebbles just to put a little bit more emphasis on. So I'm bringing out these golden kind of outlaws to it. I, again, in the water that it's flowing, I selectively went and edited that just to put a little bit more emphasis and detail in those lines. I made the sky a lot more dramatic compared to what it was. I brought out the orange glows a bit more, the purples. And then I brought the shadowy areas back on the rock, right by the hole in the wall, so my eye gets drawn a lot more towards that focal point. And I changed the balance because I initially thought it would work great in landscape in the 16:9, but once I cropped the photo, I wasn't happy with the end result. And then I thought, let's go more to the 5:4 medium format, have a look at it and see what the end result would be. And I think overall, visually, this is a very striking image compared to what it initially was, where it was great. Now it's phenomenal. Let's have one more look at the end result. We can just have a look at the specific details that I just mentioned that I wanted to put emphasis on a bit more. Oh, and sorry, not forgetting to mention that on the pebbles, I actually put more blacks into it so I can create a lot more depth into it. So it has a bit more 3D feel to it. So just creating a lot more depth from various layers with the image. Now, this is my last photo that I'm going to discuss. This is an example, again, with our approach to our nature photography, where we underexpose, number one, to protect the whites, and to, of course, generate shutter speed. Now, there are distracting elements in the photo, that little twig, let's call it branch on the left-hand side, and then looking at what would be considered an obvious crop. So obvious crop would be to do the 5:4 or the normal 3:2 aspect ratio, and put the emphasis on the two birds. Now, this one was a little bit more difficult in the sense that I couldn't really place any of the birds' eyes or heads on a connecting third point. So I had to look more at breaking the rules in the sense fifths and sevenths, etc., to put emphasis into specific areas that I wanted. So from there, I did my selective adjustments, brightness, contrast. I looked at my density in this one, specifically to create more depth on the birds compared to the background. And I felt that I wanted to bring the blues that the Chobe's water reflection, even though I can't see the reflection of the water, but I mean, those blues are striking, just to give it a little bit more depth throughout again. And then I went in and specific with the selected and local adjustments on the eyes, because I lost it on the previous image and I couldn't see it. Now I had to bring it out because reds and those little bee eaters are really striking, and a lot of people don't necessarily see it in the crops that they do. And then, of course, now selectively going and working areas, like, for instance, that soft bristles on the branch, I put a little bit more of a soft focus on it, so it's not as distracting as it initially was. And then bringing out the little yellows underneath the chins and the greens on the back, darkening the little areas on the chest, just so I can put a little bit more highlight on the blues, and then top of the eye again, selectively. Now that was the overall image. And then I thought to myself, but okay, but there's more than one story within the story. And then I decided to do one last crop, and is to put emphasis on the bird at the bottom as it's taking off. Now, this one works on a smaller screen, but looking at it bigger, I just missed the depth, personally. Those little tips of the wings at the front aren't sharp, but that's not being very critical of myself. But again, my attention is drawn to my subject matter. And by changing the crop, we did get rid of a lot of the distracting elements, which worked in the previous one, because we had our rule of thirds still, because instead of just 3 subject matters, we had 3 elements: the branch, the 2 birds.
And I mean, that just shows you've got more than one image in a original photo.
An original image.
Yeah.
Now, this is an interesting one, I think, in the sense that it's actually a good photo, but there's one really, really distracting thing in the photo. In a little green piece of grass right at the bottom of the feet of the African jaguar. So my background is nice and clean. My focus point is well lit, the light in the eye. Now, this is where you need to be a little bit more creative in the sense of what are you going to do with your crop? Again, because there's more than one crop to an image, and it's not necessarily the first one. So I went in and I decided the one on the left side, let's try and crop out as much as possible of the distracting little piece of grass, and put emphasis on the fact that this big foot of the African jacana, that's one of his main features. And as it breaks the water with the water splash, and a bit more of a portrait. Whereas on the right-hand side, I took a little play out of Neil's book and went for the more abstract kind of images, because it is a well-known feature of the bird. And let's put a little bit more emphasis on, because, I mean, why not?
Yeah.
It works. And just to give you guys a little bit more, again, being a little bit more critical of myself, the very first one is after I did the extreme crop, I felt I lost some of those details in those little folds within the foot. The bottom one, I went further and upscaled the image just to bring those little details back into it, especially if you view it large, then it becomes a lot more prominent. And I felt on the top one, because of the crop, the water drops weren't necessarily as crisp as I wanted it. So with the upscaling, it just put that little bit of extra detail back into the photo for me. And I think at the end of the day, by doing that, a lot of the clutter, again, with the crop has been eliminated. And now my eye is actually being drawn to specific points within the image that I felt at that point in time, this is amazing. This one, again, there's a lot of distracting elements in the background. I felt that it didn't add to the image initially. And my focal point, even though I'm trying to tell the story of the scatter egret on the back of the elephant, but the foreground is very distracting with all of those pieces of debris in the water in front of it. So we went over to the typical crop that most guys would look at, is still to have the elephant and then a cattle egret. But now if you look really closely, there's an insect in the cattle egret, which I felt that should be a bigger point of focus. Because I can tell that it's an elephant with the texture, but the real story for me was the insect that this cattle egret caught while in the back of the elephant. Because, I mean, he wanted to snack as well. So that's where the story is for me. And the fact that I used all of these elements yet again to get the details still in the whites and bring out the exposure, etc. But again, being really critical of myself, I felt that I lacked a bit of detail and actually ended up upscaling it for my end result for social media.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's just it. Look at the image and then decide, where you're going to go with it. Because most people have amazing images and they just leave it at that. They don't focus on those specific areas. So this was an image I took last week in the Delta on a vehicle. As you would know, you don't have much choice when you have a leopard sighting, and this female leopard had taken down a red lechwe, and her and the young son were feeding on it, taking turns. But it's in and out the bush and behind branches, and we have to move the vehicle so everybody can get a view and a few shots. But this was an image that I took, and as you can see, the background, I have to consider there's a lot of dead space on the right. The focus area should be around the head, the eye, and then we've got other distracting objects like that huge tree on the left, and at the bottom, the grasses. So I decided to take the image and really crop it and focus on the eye. Now, I think I can possibly do a bit more with it, darkening around the edges, but this just tells a little bit of a different story, just viewing that initial image. This is more powerful.
And I think you also have another crop as well, where you can just go tighter in
Yes,
on the eye.
I'm sure.
But I feel that the paw actually adds so much to the photo.
No, definitely. Another image from the Chobe. This is a lesser jacana, and we were thrilled to bits when we actually found the pair of lesser jacana and took so many photographs. And I was perfectly happy with this initial image until we started looking around and what I can create with this, because the question is being asked, are you a photographer or are you an artist? So with that in mind, we're super critical of what we're doing nowadays. And you can see the distracting objects like the branches and the flowers, but the focus point is good. And then I just decided, okay, let's get into the detail here. This is all I took. I cropped this out of this put, just pulling up the water. And now it's one of my favorite images. So
it's almost like a silk dress.
Yes.
That's absolutely.
And that's just looking at your images. As I say, everybody's got amazing images. You've got so many. Just look at them critically and ask yourself, where is the focus point on this specific image? And can I do something to enhance it, to bring it out? Denoise and sharpening, very, very important. So it's the process of basically removing the digital noise from a picture. It's absolutely unique to digital photographs. And you will know your image is noisy if you blow it up 100, 200% and it looks like a Christmas tree. Then you'll know you need to do something about it. Don't throw those images away. Keep them. I mean, we're working on images that are 10, 15 years old. With today's technology, and it's just incredible what you can resuscitate out of those old images. So as we said earlier in the webinar, that the noise reduction in Lightroom is done first. And as part of the DxO PhotoLab, that is part of the export process in the end. So the sharpening, what is sharpening? I mean, that just goes and it enhances the edges and details and the contrast of an image. Make sure not to overdo that. So an image shot, I think, also 12 years ago, 25,600 ISO, early one morning on the Chobe. You can see quite a bit of noise there on the right. We took it through DxO 7 for start, just did the noise reduction. Then the exposure, we just added a little bit of exposure. So now that image is quite usable, and the same from a Lightroom point of view. Put it through Lightroom, the noise disappears. You can use that image.
Just to add to what Neil just mentioned as well, is that each of these software is phenomenal in its own right, but they are slightly better in specific areas. Like personally, I feel in this specific area, Lightroom did a much better job in the noise reduction in the lighter areas, and it still maintained the depth. DxO did bring back a heck of a lot of detail in black areas and maintain the black areas, which I felt was really nice. But it also tried to bring back the detail actually in the bokeh areas at the back. and which I think was quite interesting, especially because now you're creating a little bit more depth with your, well, in a sense, with your sharpening with a little bit more depth of field, which I find quite
And that's
interesting.
it. If you're confident with the two programs, try the one, try the other one when it gets to noise reduction and editing, because you would know we flip between the two depending on the type of image. Just in terms of processing time, I mean, these images, these tools nowadays, they also demand significant processing time. That previous image of the buffalo we put through 3 different machines. Apple Macs here at work was one with an M1, M2, and an M3 processor, and you can see the difference. So there's almost a double the time that the M1 takes compared to a M3. But I mean, these aren't crazy times. It's not you sit there, wait for an hour for something to render. You have to know and you have to realize that power of your PC is going to be tapped when you go for all of these new software programs out there and editing programs. That is something to consider. Together with that, you're looking at your read speed of your cards and your hard drives. Don't forget all of this. You try and do something on your old machine and it doesn't happen, and then it's everybody else's fault. No, that's true. You have to be aware of that. So just with the tools, you can see here quite clearly in terms of before noise reduction on the left and after noise reduction. This is what the tools can get you nowadays.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, don't be scared of
No.
ISO anymore.
No.
I mean, we've said it quite a few times, but really, it's a world of a difference.
So this is one of my worst moments. We were in the Mara and nothing was happening, and we sat next to the river, and I was messing around with the camera, photographing water flowing around a carcass there, trying to get that nice smooth water view. And low ISOs, what is it, 64 ISO, and I went to minus 4.3, and the next moment the animal started to cross behind us. So, drop everything, rush around with the vehicle, drive around, park, start taking photographs like crazy. And at some point I had a look at the back of my screen, and this is what I saw, and I thought, I can't believe it. We've been waiting so long, and now I see this. But I'll show you what the actual result is and what the software is capable of without really a huge stretch. But before I get there, so when you see something like that, or when you want to edit something, few things. I mean, have a look, your exposure, your contrast. The white balance should be auto white balance, I mean, to make it easier.
It's most forgiving as well.
Exactly. And your color grading, you're not really going to mess around on a daily basis with. But your noise reduction, important. Your sharpening, important. Don't overdo these things. And then obviously, as you explained, local adjustments. Go into specific areas with your gradient filters and adjustment brushes and sort those out. Preserve details, Be mindful that you don't over soften an image and actually lose a lot of the detail. Make sure you keep that natural look. And the editing software, I mean, that's non-destructive.
Predominantly, most everything these days is non-destructive.
Yeah, so you can carry on.
Sorry, when I mentioned most, all upscaling software is destructive, and that's why you need to make sure that it creates a copy and not overrides the original. That I just need to mention to everyone. So your editing side is all non-destructive. Lightroom, Photoshop, DxO, but your upscaling has to be another version, because otherwise your one that you work so hard on and you feel that the upscaling isn't good enough, that photo's gone and you have to restart again. So just small little minute point to keep in mind. That is destructive. So
having said that, with that very dark image and literally going and bumping up my exposure, doing my noise reduction, this is what I have. So I have a whole series of images that I thought were pitch black, which I actually have some incredible images. What saved me here was I think the low ISO that we were shooting at. And I think I was shooting with Nikon D810 at that stage, and they're incredibly forgiving in terms of shooting at minus EVs.
Oh, the dynamic range.
Yeah, dynamic range is great. A little bit of a blurb before we go into the live demonstration. Those of you who don't know us, we've been in business for more than 16 years. We've hosted over 400 photographic safaris. In the team, we're sitting with over 150 years of experience. And since we started training many, many years ago, about 30,000 people have passed through our hands. If you're battling with your editing and you want specific attention and specific help, There are a few products that we can offer, like the Ignite program that we've got, which is 5 hours one-on-one training, where we will really hammer out your editing process and your workflow. Then there's the larger mentorship program. We'll do everything from nature photography all the way through to your specific needs that you have. And then we have created a number of videos explaining DxO PhotoLab, and that is also on our website. So I've selected a few images that we can look at, and I'm going to do it in Lightroom. First of all, let me do this one. So here I've got an image that I shot at minus 1.3 EV. I was on 10,000ths of a second, f9, and I was shooting at ISO 1250. That was on the Sony A9 III. So it's a 24 megapixel file. First thing I would do is I would go to my detail. I'll just hit the denoise. If there is any denoise, the default is around 50. So just do that. You can see top left, it's running. It's about 10, 15 seconds. There we go. Then I would just do my crop. And in this case, I think the crop that we've got here, the 2x3. So let me try something else, 4x5. So this will be an Instagram type of crop. That's my crop.
And I do feel that that crop also, because the branch that was a little bit out of focus in the front right became a bit distracting.
That's right.
Attention gets pulled a lot better.
So then I'll go to my exposure. A little bit on the highlights, take that down just to preserve that. I've got some shadows that I want to bring out. The whites, tiny touch on the whites. The blacks, I think, are good. Clarity, I'm going to leave. Little bit on the vibrance. And that's it. That's me done.
Yeah, just a quick question. Would you go and darken the background? Just out of interest,
I
like
could.
if you spend more time on the image.
I could, but for this one, I wouldn't want to, because I wanted to stand out. But to darken the image, I mean, it's as simple as choosing the subject and going invert on there, and then on your exposure, just going down a little bit. Just be mindful of areas like this where it might not catch, but I wouldn't do too much on that one for now. So example number 1.
Sorry, I'm not wasting time, but would you go and look at another crop? Just at the crop?
We could do that.
With the head and the insect.
So you could do that.
So we again look at a photo within a photo.
Yeah.
Something kind of like that.
Something like that to bring the focus up there. Okay, so you can see that's fit. It's 100%, so it may be a little bit small. It's a 24 meg original file, which is just over about 2.5 on here now. But then you would typically go and do your upscaling and put it into gigapixel or one of those and try and get it a bit bigger.
And I mean, yeah, so much detail still. They do a really good job to bring it out even more.
I think so. Okay, so let's leave that one for now.
So that's one of the simpler ones.
That's one of the simpler ones, yeah. So let's have a look at this one. Minus 1.7. That's a malachite kingfisher diving off a reed, 1/6400th of a second, f8 ISO 4000. So a few years ago, I wouldn't even be going to 4000, but now it's really not an issue. So step number 1 for me, I'll go to my detail. I'll hit my denoise. That's done. I'll enhance. Just, you see the top left, that one's running there. So the focus is going to be around this area, because I want to isolate the bird as much as possible. It's also on the Sony A9 Mark III. So let's go and edit that one. I'm going to use that 5x4 crop. We'll move this one around now. Let's just try something like that. You can see in the overall size of the total image, it's cropped quite significantly. Go basic to increase my exposure. Save the highlights a little bit. On the shadows, just bring that out a bit. Slightly on the clarity, just to get some definition. A little bit on the vibrance. And for me, that's it. Done. So if we look at 100%, or even further, 200%, You can see there's a lot of detail there. If you want to reduce the whites a little bit more, you can do that, but you can see there's a 200%, which is not something you'll be looking at the whole time.
You see all those little fine brown feathers sticking out of the blue.
Exactly. I think the next one I'm going to do in DxO, Nico.
Okay.
So here we have an open bill stalk. So I've imported in Lightroom. I'll take this and I'm going to drop it into my DxO PhotoLab. Let me take that one. I've got my presets set up on this side for the Sony. Got the presets. Let's just do the crop. Now, once again, there can be more than one crop in here. So let's see, that's closed. And then I'll just work from the left here in DxO and just see, okay, so exposure, maybe a little bit more. Save a bit on the highlights. A little bit on the shadows, bring that out. I think the blacks are good. And I think that's it. And then I'm just going to hit export, and then that's done for this one. We'll see now, because it's already added my watermark, everything in here, the same as in Lightroom. The next crop I'm going to do, I'm just going to go tighter on the head. And that's that. Really, really, really simple, both of these programs. Let me just get this one a bit closer. We'll do a bit on the exposure. Save the detail on the highlights. Do a bit on the shadows. And export. Let's export that one. And now this is already done. You can see the deep prime, all the specific noise reduction and sharpening. So if you don't see it so sharp on the main screen, just open this little window on the side here and you'll see how sharp your images actually are.
Oh yeah, because it just uses way too much processing power.
And there you go.
It's just like, personally, I find this a lot more striking compared to the initial one.
Yeah.
Because now you're actually starting to see that.
That's where the focus is.
That's where the focus
is.
One of the things that you previously actually mentioned, Neil, about the online course for DxO, but just keep in mind that if you buy like something like the Ignite, you can do it dedicated on DxO or on Lightroom, whatever your preference is.
Yes.
Because I mean, we have to know the software and we need to make sure that the help that we give you is going to be the best possible in result for you guys.
Yes.
So just a little note on that side.
I've got a question, Nico. I was just wondering why you wouldn't use something like Photo Mechanics to download from your disk to get rid of all the rubbish before you take the time to put through Lightroom, which is so slow.
Okay, so I've actually done a test recently where, depending on the combination of software and, as Neil mentioned earlier, with hard drives, etc., you actually won't believe the slowest download process was the one through Photo Mechanic compared to Lightroom or just copying and paste. But with my M2, doing it through Photo Mechanic and renaming, etc., took like 35 minutes for 64 gigs worth of images. When I copied and pasted to and faster hard drive, not renaming in the process, but doing the renaming in the software, I went from 36 minutes down to 12. So in terms of my workflow, it was a lot faster. So it's not that I've eliminated Photo Mechanic completely. So I still use it to view and to get rid of rubbish, which I can do in Lightroom as well. But because I predominantly edit in PhotoLab, I do that in Photo Mechanic because DxO just needs to build all of the thumbnails first, which slows it down. But in a nutshell, it came down to the amount of time that it took for downloading. It was just slower through Photo Mechanic. That's the main reason.
Okay.
If I can add to that, I mean, the M3 machine that I'm using, and I work through Lightroom, and I've got a very fast external hard drive. It takes for an 80 gig card just over 2 minutes to download 80 gigs of photographs of data onto my machine. So it depends on what you've got. And Photo Mechanic, I mean, that works perfectly. If that's your fastest tools that you've got, then that's perfect.
Okay.
It's going to vary from system as well.
Thanks.
So Topaz AI's built-in upscaling, is it the same quality as Gigapixel? Yes, it's 100% the same. It's exactly the same algorithm that they use. Of course, Topaz AI just now has all the functionality of the AI built-in preset editing that you can do in the very selective things. But the quality between the two is 100% the same. Same algorithm, same breakdown, same approach. I mean, at the moment, I really can't even tell the difference between most of the really high-end upscaling software, where guys will say this one's better than the other one. But again, it's a matter of preference, really. But again, yeah, there's no difference between the two. It's very much the same.
Actually, as a follow-up question on that one.
Yes.
So just to clarify for me, because I'm just starting to get into the Topaz stuff, really. I had all the standalone, the gigapixel and the sharpen and the denoise, and now it's the AI program.
Correct.
Are you saying really you could just use the new Topaz AI, which has got everything built in, instead of trying to use the other?
That's what I was doing. I wasn't using anything else but Topaz AI as one of the tools that I had, because it's doing a wonderful job.
So you can basically see it as a suite of software in one. So have all those standalone software. And you can actually set it up to be a plugin for any others, well, besides PhotoLab, but it works as a plugin for Lightroom as well. So
okay, great.
So is denoise seen as enhancement and manipulation? It's enhancement, really, because all that it really does is it takes the information that's there, which really is noise, a signal information, and just fixes it. Really, that's what it does. So manipulation, because it's not really adding anything, it's just bettering it.
I think they're also speaking about the resizing of an image.
Resizing comes down to you increase the size, really, of it, rebuilds those pixels to make a bigger image. But when rebuilding that information, if there's like any imperfections, it enhances those imperfections as well. So that's why with all of this upscaling software has a various form of AI built into it to compensate for those imperfections. But by compensating for that imperfections, it generally makes the image softer. So you need to sharpen it a little bit further within the software, just so to regain those details. Now, again, by enhancing all of that detail, if you have a speck of noise that's not necessarily visible to your eye when you look at your image prior to upscaling, it becomes a lot more prominent when it's upscaled. And that's why you need to do a little bit of denoising as part of the software again as well, just to that impact that noise is going to have on the image. So you fairly much have to resize, sharpen, and denoise in all of the steps in the upscaling software. I think that's the simplest answer that I can give on that question.
Easy for you to say.
I think that's a little bit more technical mind side. If I need to learn how to shoot kingfishers, I'm going to go to Neil. I'm good with birds, but I'm not that good with kingfishers diving in and out of the water. But the technical side I can break down fairly easy. But I'm glad it makes sense to you, Toby.
Thank you. A lot of people don't know where to start. And you start by what we explained. You start by denoising, you start by cropping, you start by exposure, and the image will come to life. And the more images you look at and photographs of friends and other photographers, you start to build that frame of reference, and you think, that's nice. I'm sure I can do this, or I can do that with my software. And yeah, you go ahead.
One of the things that I think we had an interesting debate about today is that when people view an image, especially when it comes to cropping, try and do at least 5 different crops in a photo, because your initial crop may not be the best one. So with Neil in the Lightroom with the DxO first, my approach in DxO is I first get the exposure right, because it's just a little bit darker compared to what Lightroom DS actually gives you. And then from there, then I'm now able to see what I want to do with the photo a lot better. Could be good to give some details of what is in presets used in DxO one Neil used.
So the presets, if you have DxO and you go to the presets, you have natural, there's standard. Basically, you can take those as a very good starting point. My preset obviously includes my the specific camera that I use, and also the watermark. It's very similar to what we have on the standard that you get anyway. So, and you can tweak those presets little bit by little bit until it works for you.
Yeah, because I mean, the preset that a general standard preset may not give you as much vibrancy in a photo as you like to have initially. So you can go and tweak that, and it's a lot with your personal preference, really. But there are specifics that you can work from the standard presets and build from there. How do you feel about generative fill? I guess, so that's more on the manipulation side again. I don't have any problem with manipulation when it comes to doing it for yourself. Even posting it on social media, I mean,
so replace the Bill's bill. Fantastic.
You can do it. I just feel that this is, again, my personal point of view on this, is that if you do something like that, I would generally say that I did use a tool in Photoshop to do it, because it does move away from the authenticity of the image. And of course, it's not authentic anymore. It becomes more of a graphic and design aspect.
You can do what you want. You
can do what you want.
Put it on your wall at home.
It's
your image. You do what you want.
I mean, I played around today with a generative AI fill in Lightroom today, and I thought it was fantastic. But it's going to be something that I do for myself, not necessarily put out in the public, because now I am moving away from authenticity, which, I mean, is the name of the game. But I find it really interesting that you were able to fill in the bird's bowl with the. We need to try that one.
Fantastic.
So coming down, just my last thought on this is that if you guys have any questions that pop to mind after the webinar, please rewatch it again when it's sent out on the newsletter, because we know revisiting always refreshes the mind. You have our details. Monique just dropped our email address in there. You're more than welcome to send us email direct, and we'll make sure that it gets to the relevant person. If you direct it to Neil, it'll get to Neil. If it's directed to me, it'll get to Neil as well. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Really enjoyed the session.
Appreciate the positive comments, and look out for our next one.
Thank you.